Hello, this is Mark, President of the Institute on Religion and Democracy in Washington, D.C., although I'm sitting outside my home in Alexandria, Virginia, beautiful day, and talking with Dr. Joanne Lyon, former General Superintendent of the Wesleyan Church, one of the great Methodist denominations in the United States. And she is also, if I'm recalling correctly, the Vice President of Wesley Seminary in Central Indiana. So, Joanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here. I might make a correction. I'm no longer the vice president. We found a wonderful president, and so I was filling in until an interim until we found someone. So, but I am the vice chair of the National Association of Evangelicals now.
Very good. Well, thank you for that correction. And for those who are listening who don't know a lot about the Wesleyan world, or specifically the Wesleyan denomination, tell us a little bit about it, where it came from, how big it is, and your own lifetime involvement with it.
Well, that's a great question, Mark. Actually, my family came to Christ through circuit riding preachers in Western Kansas. So I'm third generation and forever grateful to those circuit riding preachers back in the late 1800s. My grandmother had great conviction. Her family had no faith whatsoever. And she rode when she was 16 years old, got on a horse and rode to find God, she said, to the circuit riding preacher. And it is there that our whole family history of faith began, and on through then the generations and my parents and so forth. So a long history with the entire Methodist tradition as such. The Wesleyan Church itself it came out of the Methodist Church during the slavery days, end of the late 1800s. They didn't believe in slavery and had an argument with the Methodist Church at that time, and they became abolitionists. They were abolitionists, and so they started what was known then as the Wesleyan Methodist Church. Now, I understand that several of the leaders then did come back to the Methodist Church after the Methodist Church was able to handle some of their issues regarding members who were slaveholders, et cetera, and all the Southern Methodists, Northern Methodists, et cetera. However, the Methodist Church, Wesleyan Methodist Church, continued on. They were also large, very prominent piece in the women's rights movement. And Seneca Falls, New York, where the first women's rights convention was held, it was held in the basement of a Wesleyan Methodist church because they were the only ones in town that would allow them to meet. So that's a bit of our heritage. And then we were part of the larger American Holiness groups that emerged during the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then there was a denomination called the Pilgrim Holiness, which was part of that group. And in 1968, the Wesleyan Methodist Church and the Pilgrim Holiness Church merged to make what we know now today as the Wesleyan Church. So we value greatly and are strong proponents of Wesleyan theology and try to live within within that structure and believe. Believe that's where we've been called.
And about how many members of the Wesleyan Church are there today in the United States? It
would be, actually, it's interesting. We have members, but we have more attenders and adherents, I guess I would say, than members. So in the United States, probably, in the United States, probably 750,000.
750,000.
Uh-huh.
Ah. Well, and to look back on a little bit of more history, of course, the United Methodist Church became the much larger Wesleyan denomination, but early in the 20th century became much more theologically liberal and was a so-called mainline Protestant denomination. Right. The Wesleyan Church, by contrast, always remained theologically orthodox and evangelical. how do you explain that distinction? And how did you all stay more thoroughly Wesleyan, arguably, than did the larger United Methodist Church?
Well, I think perhaps we really certainly believed and practiced the theology of holiness and what John Wesley preached regarding perfection, Christian perfection. And so that became much of our emphasis in that, and that we could live a life, a holy life. I think, we went off the rails at times in legalism and had to pull back and begin to say, really, what is this? What is the teaching here? And then I think also we really saw that God called us as Wesley to spread, as he would say, spread scriptural holiness and reform a nation, as what he said in England. And we believe that our ministry to the poor and who we were, and that was lived out in that way as well. So I guess I personally think that we really tried to, and continue to, not just did, but really in more significant ways now, really live out the Amos passage of let justice roll down like a river and righteousness as a never failing stream. And so when I take a look at that, and I think we teach this, and this is what we believe, is that it's about holiness lived out, a holy life lived out. And so if you have just justice, you can end up just being political. If you have righteousness, you can end up to be just very, very inward and isolated and just trying to make yourself holy. But it's the power of the Holy Spirit that puts both of those together and brings transformation.
Now, if I'm recalling correctly, the Wesleyan Church began ordaining women as clergy many decades before the Methodist Church did. When did that begin, and have you been ordained all of your adult life?
Yes, well, actually, the founder of the Wesleyan Methodist Church ordained the first woman to be ordained in the United States in 1853, Antoinette Brown. So we began ordaining women. I mean, I was really stunned, actually, Mark, not long ago when I saw that the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, did not begin ordaining or something. I believe it was 1952 or some
I think 1956.
Yes, I was stunned beyond belief because we've ordained women all this time. My mother was ordained. But I think there's an interesting piece. A lot of women were ordained, but then there's this whole piece. We still struggle with these things today. I wish we could just be perfect about it. But we ordained women. They could preach, pastor, these kinds of things. And then you got to remember, we all were kind of revivalist types. And so it was we weren't institutionalized. And then as we became more institutionalized, then men became the power structure. So there's that fear that still is there about women with power and authority. But I think it's breaking down when we finally begin to name it and begin to recognize it. Yes, I've been ordained and pastored and so forth. And so it's just a journey that we're all on this, I think, together. But there were times that I kept thinking, maybe if we had a law against being ordained, we would have a law to fight against, but we didn't. It was open. It was open. So it was about changing and helping people to understand that this is God's call. Back to Joel, the great passage in Joel, and then at Pentecost of men, women, and slave and free, etc. And so that's where we have really been.
Well, many people are often surprised that it was the smaller and more theologically conservative Wesleyan denominations, the holiness churches, and the Pentecostals who were ordaining women many decades before the mainline Protestant Methodist Church was. That's
right. That's exactly right. And you know what? I think we're marginalized. We're a marginalized group. And so marginalized people tend to do more risky things and move forward. And I think there's that zeal, the gospel zeal, that keeps you moving in those ways as well.
And in terms of a little bit of biographic information about you, where did you attend seminary, and where was most of your pastoral ministry located geographically?
Well, actually, my theological training came at St. Louis University with Jesuits. So that's a little different. Because I have undergrad in education and a master's in counseling psychology, and did a lot of urban work in the 70s, late 60s and 70s in Kansas City. And at the same time, my husband and I were pastoring an inner city church as well as planting a new church. My journey is a little different than most people like you. But you know what? You walk in a door that God opens. So those were the ways. And then I went ahead then with graduate study in historical theology at St. Louis University. In 1996, I started World Hope International, which is an international relief and development agency to work alongside the Wesleyan Church. And God began to open just amazing doors in that. And then we worked beyond. And then in the year 2000 is when we moved to Washington, D.C. And that was at the same time that George Bush was introducing the faith-based initiatives, and we were just able to move into that. And then in 2008, 12 years after I started World Hope, that's when I was elected as the General Superintendent of the Wesleyan Church. I was the first female to be elected. And you know what? That was not, many said this was not about your gender. This was about your leadership. And I think this is where we really need to always look at this. It is about giftedness, not gender. And I say that many times. If you flip it on the other side, there have been women who have been very gifted position, but they've never been given the position because of their gender. So I think it really has to be giftedness. What is the giftedness for that particular position, and not a person's gender? At the same time, women get overlooked a lot, and I'm very troubled by that. And it's about changing the what's normal in a local congregation. United Methodist Church, you do appointments. We don't. Our churches elect. And so that's where it becomes even more difficult to change the notions and the ideas that people have. But we're making progress, and we're working along that line.
And the Wesleyan Church is growing in the United States. Is that
yes,
correct?
It is. Yes, actually, we did some real, when I first came in, we did some real study to take a look, and I was stunned when I saw that 50% of our churches had no baptisms. And I said, "Oop, what kind of a business are we in here?" So we did a whole listening tour throughout the whole United States and listened to what thoughts and people had, and put together white people, et cetera, did some restructuring. But at the same time, began to say, okay, discipleship, absolutely, discipleship is it. But if we don't have any converts and we haven't baptized anybody, we don't have anybody to disciple. So just began to lay down some simple kinds of pieces of attendance, conversions, baptisms. Now, I know there's lots of stuff out there about butts and budgets, but ultimately you got to have both. And so amazing. I mean, amazing when people, and you know what, Mark, I started saying to pastors and to district superintendents, we have that structure too, they're over pastors. And I kept saying, why don't you pull your board together and pray? How would God want to work through us this year? And in that comes just simple kinds of numbers, that a goal. Could you get a goal? How might God surprise you with that goal if you really worked at it? And we did. And the testimonies were amazing. I remember one pastor came to me and he said, I had this outrageous goal that we could baptize a person a week. And he was in a small church, maybe 100 people. He came to district conference and he said, I'm here to report. I thought this was crazy, and the church did too, but we prayed. And I want you to know we have baptized 54 people this year. And so he said, God surprised me with my vision, but to put it down and say, Lord, I'm praying for this. So actually what happened, if you look at our data, we have, it was really straight up straight up every year from 2008 to 2016, increase in attendance, conversions, and baptisms. Now, discipleship goes with that. Diversity, big on diversity, and certainly about people being filled with the Holy Spirit. I mean, we really believe that. So, all of that. But you got to have a baseline someplace.
Sure. And is there growing diversity in the Wesleyan Church in terms of outreach to immigrants, for example, and non-Anglos? Yes,
very definitely. We're very strong. We have a strong immigration statement, a position paper. We're very strong in that. In fact, we have set up in many of our churches a legal center that is approved by the Department of Justice, a legal center for immigrants. We call it Immigrant Connections. And we have these all over and welcoming immigrants, but also helping them specifically legally. We go through the training and et cetera. It's a regular program. Very strong about immigrants. And we are very strong about welcoming the stranger. I happen to serve on the evangelical immigration table as well. We do a lot regarding working on systems and I've been advocating. We have many of our people have advocated on Capitol Hill regarding immigration and immigrants and so forth. I mean, we really want to see a comprehensive immigration reform bill through. That's fair. We're not talking about just throw open the borders and everybody, but it's got to be fair. And we've been working on this for a long time.
But your work, of course, is not just political advocacy, but also evangelism and local church outreach.
Absolutely, all of that, yes. I mean, it just goes together. I don't know why it always has to be separated. But it just, I mean, the scriptures teach us that. And Wesley certainly is the model for that, Mark. I mean, who better? And I don't know how many folks from other denominations have said to me, because we've been also very involved in racial reconciliation issues. And recently I was in a meeting and someone said to me, boy, I just wish we had your theology. You know, and I want to say, I wish we lived it out better too. We really need to live it out better. It's hard. It's hard. It's costly and it's hard.
Now, as you know, American Christianity is increasingly non-denominational or post-denominational, less and less appreciation or ties to the historic Protestant and Christian traditions. So is that true in the Wesleyan Church? Is there less and less appreciation for your Wesleyan heritage as you become more generically evangelical?
Yes, we have that. We have we have a large number of mega churches that would be out of proportion for church our size. However, we don't find them say, I'm running off to be independent. They really do embrace Wesleyan theology, and are really teaching it and preaching it. I'm grateful for that. But part of that is keeping them. I mean, I regularly had meetings with our pastors of 3,000 and above churches, keeping the relationship. That's part of it, is just keeping that relationship together. And listening, because they have influence in the church. They influence the rest of the church. So how do we keep them together and working together? And the advantages, there are advantages of a denomination. Believe me, the accountability is huge. And they're grateful for it. I mean, they will say, I'm glad I'm part of a denomination that has the accountability with it. And we've worked out financially all kinds of things, so they aren't, assessed to the max and all that stuff.
And you all have, I believe, 3 seminaries associated with the denomination?
No, we have only one seminary, Wesley Seminary, and it's embedded with Indiana Wesleyan University. It's a new seminary. And the reason that I was when I left the general superintendent's job, I felt like I'd done all that I needed to do. And so I chose to leave, and then they asked me to be the interim there. So that was the vice president position. I was the interim there for a year. I guess I need to get that off the website. I was the interim there for the year, and then we got in a new president who's a female. She's a great president. You should talk with her sometime. Superb. I can give you the info. And then we have Houghton College is one of our colleges, is
Mhm.
Wesleyan College, Southern Wesleyan University, Oklahoma Wesleyan University, and Indiana Wesleyan University. So we have 4 college, well, and one in Canada, Kingswood University. So we have 5 colleges and 1 seminary.
And then finally, Joanne, if you could tell us a little bit about your work with the National Association of Evangelicals, which is now under new leadership with a new president.
Yes. Well, I've been part of NAE for a long time, various capacities, and then when I lived in DC, did things with them. And so then, let's see, I was part of the board for quite a while, and NAE's gone through several reorganization kinds of pieces. But then probably 10 years ago, I was invited to be on the executive committee of the NAE, and worked with them on the executive committee. And then in this new restructure, or the transition, I'm very pleased with the new president, Walter Kim, and the chair of the board, John Jenkins. Two great men. And then they invited me to be the vice chair. So we just had the inauguration last March. Well, this March, first part of March. And so we've just started with this new team of leadership. I think there's some good pieces ahead and good thinking processes through. The problem with the word evangelical, it has been so politicized that in these days it's hard to really, but you can't change the name, and it's a rich name. Evangelical is rich. I mean, it goes clear back early times, and so it's how do we redefine that and people understand what evangelical really means. So I wrote a piece in a book, The State of the Evangelical Mind. I wrote a chapter on the state of the evangelical church that University Press put out, and began to say, and I looked through it regarding renewal movements. What really, as we look through renewal movements that have taken place here in the United States, and what really has taken place with them, what does it impact in culture? And so that's we're moving forward with NAE, and I think some new ways to express ourselves, and still hold true to the orthodoxy. Yeah,
absolutely. And then one final question for you. Everyone claims that America is becoming irrevocably more secular. Are you optimistic or more guarded about the future of Christianity in America?
Well, you know what? See, I'm probably an optimistic person, but I do believe that people are looking for truth, are looking for hope, and because there's a God void in each of us, they're looking for God. And I was part of the Council on Faith with the World Economic Forum, and the reason that council was formed was because the World Economic Forum did a study and said that by 2050, 90% of the world would be religious in some way. And so they began to say, well, we need to take a look at faith. What is this all about? And actually the number is already 84%. So that says there is that God vacuum that people are searching. So I guess I have this hope with Christianity that there is that God vacuum, and we've been made to have that God vacuum filled. So Jesus Christ is that God vacuum to fill it. And so I do have hope in that. It may not be in ways in which the methods may be totally different. And I think we may have been stuck in methods that seem to be the only way. But I do think that I guess I have hope, Mark, and kind of excited about it in a way, what this may look like, how God may lead us. Is there renewal coming in the midst of all of this coronavirus? I mean, I keep hearing people contacting pastors. They haven't been in touch with the church. They haven't been in touch with God. They've been looking for God. I mean, the Economist magazine the other day did a study that the spikes in asking for prayer, the spikes, just huge spikes, people looking for something. So I think we've got to be wise that when we leave that we don't just say, oh, this is the only way it's been done, so I got to go back to this way. There are going to be new ways. but I'm praying that we will be courageous enough to lead in ways that that the Holy Spirit wants to lead us. I still believe that we're led by the Holy Spirit. and then there's power in the Holy Spirit.
Joanne Lyon, former General Superintendent of the Wesleyan Church and Vice Chair of the National Association of Evangelicals, thank you so much for a very informative conversation, and God bless your leadership and ministry.
Thank you, Mark. A delight to be with you, and I appreciate you personally so much.
Thank you.